We talk to businessmen. The California Business Roundtable will tell us over and over again that the graduates they get from Cal State University are the people who make their businesses work. And yet, we are cheating those institutions, and we are impoverishing our own state because we're not looking at the costs that we're imposing on the parts of the community who need access to that and who are our human capital.
When you craft solutions, though, I think you have to take into account human nature. I'm not an advocate of undertaxing the wealthy. I don't believe anybody should be overtaxed. But when you have a structure where 25% of the general fund is predicated on the income tax of the top 1%, what you find is you get these huge peaks and valleys. Governor Davis was governor when we had the largest increase in revenue in California history, and he was governor when we had the next year the largest decline in revenue in California history. And the reason we have these structural deficits is, as Governor Davis accurately pointed out, when we get the spikes, Republicans want to give it back and Democrats want to spend it. But if you take one multimillionaire who leaves the state, you have to create 1,500 jobs just to keep revenue stable, and we're not creating those kind of jobs. So overtaxing the wealthy causes greater problems long-term for the middle class. Second of all, you have to take into account that everybody overspends. Governor Davis became governor. He was left with a $12.3 billion surplus. The Democrat Speaker of the Assembly at the time proposed a sales tax increase, and the Democrat Speaker of the Chair of Appropriations proposed taxing the internet because 12.3 billion wasn't enough. Conversely, there's a reason this time you didn't see a Republican budget proposal to close the deficit without tax increases. There wasn't a single Republican in the legislature who put forward a proposal to deal with the deficit without tax increases.
And why is that?
Because at the end of the day, they were politically cowards. Nobody was willing to come to the table and say what
the electoral process.
No one had the courage to say, I will vote for these cuts. I will vote for these massive cuts. If you fire every employee in Sacramento, that gets you about, including the Highway Patrol, about 18 billion. Everyone at the University of California, another 10 billion. You still got $14 billion to go. No one had the courage as a Republican to say, I'm for all these cuts to get you to 42 billion. When I was governor, I was able to persuade my good friend Jim Brulte, who was the minority leader in the Senate, who didn't like my budget one year. I said, okay, fine. You propose your budget. If you can get it through, I'll sign it. So he takes it to the Assembly Republicans, and 7 Assembly Republicans said, I'm not going to vote for any of your cuts. They're too harsh. Now, they're not going to even tolerate a conversation on taxes, but they're not interested in making cuts. Well, I say to myself, what are you doing in Sacramento if you're not dealing with the state's pressing problems? That is why you need fundamental reforms in addition to the spending cap and rainy day fund. The governor's redistricting initiative, which I supported, and I think Jim Brulte supported and campaigned for, will kick in 2012, and that will begin to put some legislators in jeopardy if they don't deal with big issues, budget, health, and water, to name three.
Dave, along that point, Governor Davis mentions people's politics in jeopardy, their careers in jeopardy. How many members lost their seat last election? 0. Why? Because the system that we have allows them to be on the extreme right or the extreme left, and they're going to come back and get reelected. And that's the focus. That's the focus here. Let's just cover that 15, 25%. So how are you going to fix the state when the system's broken?
Well, that's, I think,
how are you going to
redistricting,
succeed?
even though when I say the word, I know people's eyes glaze.
Well, they voted for it, though.
But they did.
So.
It narrowly won, and I was very pleased. I was happy to campaign with the governor. It was a good idea on his part. And because not every state senator is up every year, there's 100 elections in California. I would say maybe 10 or 15 seats will be competitive, but that will make the difference because those people will lose in November unless they do the right thing. And their leaders, Republican and Democrat, will try and protect them and make sure that they don't lose their seat. So that will help get a problem-solving mentality in Sacramento.
The redistricting reform will help, but it's only marginal. The extreme partisanization of the legislature began in 1998. Redistricting didn't take place until 2002.
I disagree with you. I think it had started in 1978.
Well, yeah, well, you're a little older than I am, so may be the case. But my experience was it it began in 98. It's axiomatic in any science model that the cause-effect relationship, the cause actually has to be before the effect. Something that took place in 2002 could not be the cause of something that really began in 98. It is the structure of how we elect our nominees that leads to this partisanization.
We're going to talk about solutions, but I think part of understanding what the solution is to also talk about how and why did it get this bad. And I want to ask both of you, because Democrat and Republican, you were both in office when similar situations were developing. When you look back on it now, you're not running for office, you don't have to please anybody by what you say now. What could you have done, or what should you have done? Do you ever think about what things that you could have done when you were in power that would have ameliorated some of these problems?
Well, first of all, this is more along the line of a structural reform. One of the reasons I believe in strong chief executives. Chief executives can set a high goal. Legislative bodies, by definition, have to find the most common denominator, and that tends to be the lowest common denominator. I remember when Governor Davis had a budget deficit, I went into him and I said, I'll vote for any cut you propose, as long as it's a cut. Stealing from local government's not a cut. But any cut you propose, I'll vote for. But, he had trouble with his party, and I had trouble with a lot of my party, because even though my party talks a good game about not wanting to overspend, they do overspend. So in addition to a spending limit, you have to give the governor the ability to bring spending in line mid-year, because legislative bodies are constitutionally incapable of adult action.
And they've given Governor Schwarzenegger some of that authority. They gave me some of it.
But apparently it hasn't helped too much.
Well, it helped a little bit. But the fundamental change has to come from Michael's initial point. People want more from government than they're willing to spend. Their appetite exceeds their wallet. And we have to engage in that conversation so there's not pressure on people to continually spend to fund my program, and I don't care where you get the money from. Someone mentioned another reform that I think makes sense. We have all these propositions on the ballot that says, and we can have this without increasing taxes.
That's right.
We should make them say, how much are you taking from education? How much are you taking from healthcare? How much are you taking from transportation to fund your new program? I'm sure it's worthy, but if there's no new revenue source, that means you're cutting money that would otherwise go to public schools, University of California, transportation, what have you.
Another broken
So
system.
that's another fraud on the public that we need to change.
Let's name some names. Michael, you wrote in January with regard to the budget that came from Governor Schwarzenegger. You said the Schwarzenegger administration, which was launched via an electoral campaign of majestic hypocrisy in 2003, has finally fulfilled all the heady promise of those distant days of the Gray Davis recall. The man who coasted into office by railing against his predecessor's borrowing plans proposes to meet a looming $40 billion budget deficit by borrowing $10.3 billion. Borrowing $10.3 billion. He also wants to slash K-12 and community college programs to save $5 billion, cut grants for the disabled, aged, and poor to save $2.5 billion, hack away at medical care for the needy, and slice home health workers to minimum wage. Do you blame Schwarzenegger for how, to what extent is he responsible?
Well,
for this?
I think he's certainly heavily responsible for the situation we're in today. And to be more specific, the great disappointment of the Schwarzenegger administration, not that, as you can tell, I had great hopes for it, but the great disappointment was that this was the first governor in 20 or 30 years who came in with a mandate that could not be eroded. He was elected on a wave of public emotion. The day he took office, he could have asked anything of the California electorate, and they would have followed him anywhere. But even before Election Day, we could see him showing that he was not going to use his mandate. He was going to squander it. I think we all remember that while he was still candidate, Schwarzenegger, he brought together a group of very high-level economic advisors. One of them was Warren Buffett.
Yeah.